Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a Belgian-style golden ale from Taxman Brewing Company. It's been many months since I've reviewed one of their beers. I've had quite a few. They've all been great. This specific beer is called Bourbon Barrel Investor. It is a bourbon barrel aged Belgian-style golden ale brewed with honey and vanilla, clocking in at 9% ABV. Taxman Brewing Company is based in Bargersville, Indiana. So as per usual, they've got kind of their little skull with the top hat kind of theme on their label. So true to style for Taxman, it's still there. Very bright, kind of foil-like, alternating from green to blue. Looks really neat. So let's get this one cracked gently. All right. Poured right in the old all-purpose Sam Adams glass here. All right. Yeah, that's a nice looking beer. And we'll get the whole thing in there. Yep, perfect. It's only a 12-ounce can today. All right. So, visually. Okay, visually, this is a bit darker than your average Belgian-style golden ale. It's still in the spectrum, but this is getting much more into kind of an ambery hue rather than a true Belgian golden ale kind of hue. They're a lot brighter yellow. There's a bit of orange, but this has a lot of orange and amber in there. So it's just a little darker than you'd normally see, not by much. Carbonation I can see is very active. Mostly very tiny, small champagne-like size. Carbonation bubbles rising up, but there are some kind of medium small ones coming up. And obviously it did a pretty good job forming a head there. Now, from sitting this far away, I can't smell it, even though I know it's barrel aged. So let's get right up on it. Yeah, okay, there it is. It smells really nice. It does smell a lot like a typical traditional Belgian golden ale from Belgium, though obviously there is noticeably this bourbon barrel aroma coming off of it. Now they also added in honey and vanilla. You can smell that honey sweetness underlying it. There's just a little bit of the vanilla that's not coming through quite as prominently on the nose. Much more so is just this underlying yeast and classic malt bill and then the barrel. So it smells really nice. Looks pretty much the part. Head is still sitting there holding pretty nicely. Let's just jump right in and see what this one's about. Ooh. Yeah, it's a nice beer. It's a big beer, as expected from a Belgian-style golden ale that's been barrel-aged, yeah. Very big, bold, intense flavors. Tons of layers of complexity. Belgian-style beers are always going to typically be much more complex than your average beer. This is no different. So there's a ton happening here for sure. I'm going to need a second sip to really pick this all apart, but my initial thought was 9% on a Belgian-style golden ale. The body feels a full, robust medium. Maybe I would expect it to be bordering near the bottom end of the medium heavy category, but it more or less feels like I expected that it would. In terms of mouthfeel feels exactly like I expected. There's a good bit of resistance to it, but it's not thick and chewy. It's not like an imperial stout or a milkshake IPA. It's just got a nice bit of resistance to it. And agitating around the palate on this one, it does get a little bit creamy, but nothing too far out of the norm for what I expected. So body and mouthfeel, both are kind of sitting right around where I did expect them in this ABV range. In terms of the flavor profile, big, bold, intense flavor. The bourbon barrel really does come off of this one very strongly. It's quite intense up front. There's a little bit of a booziness to it up front. And kind of as all of these flavors and layers of flavors start to open up and work their ways in and out of one another, you know, there is this massive intensification. But what I did notice was there's this slight suggestion of sweetness, and it's really kind of where that honey flavor is coming in right after that slight booziness. And then there's almost this vinous-like quality where it does taste a bit like grapes or wine, kind of that nature kind of mixed in. So it's got a very interesting, multifaceted, multi-layered flavor profile. For sure, it's so complex, I'm going to need to jump in for one more sip, and then I will pick apart this finish as well. Very nice beer. Big bourbon right up front. That booziness. You can taste this underlying yeast to it. That's where this kind of wine-like quality comes in. That honey sweetness is coming in. That's where the little bit of vanilla that does come through. It wasn't that strong in the aroma. It's not that powerful in the flavor profile, but it does come through. There's also underlying elements akin to a barley wine of figs, kind of apricot. I am getting some rich fruit kind of flavor overtones coming in here as well. In terms of the grain bill, the grain bill is really there for substance in this one. It's not really doing that much on the flavor side just because the bourbon barrel aging is so prominent, as well as these other added ingredients. Yes, it tastes like beer. You know, it's a grain-based drink, but it's not one that I would say tastes like baked goods, really, not at all. And as this flavor develops, it kind of intensifies after that honey and vanilla come through. They really kind of pop in between the 5-10 second mark, and it kind of plateaus there for a few seconds, and it slowly starts to back down. In terms of how this texturally finishes, this one finishes a little bit dry. It's not what I expected. It's much more akin to, say, a Pilsner or a Berliner Weisse or a Goza or something like that. That's kind of the sensation. And it's not a ton, but they're just on the tip of your tongue. It does start to dry out a little bit on the end of this one. That said, how does the actual length of this compare and intensity flavor-wise? It is 9% Belgian-style golden ale. It is barrel-aged, and yes, the length of the finish on this one is quite pronounced. So long after that drying effect first sets in, you are still tasting lingering bourbon and honey specifically. That's the two flavors that are kind of holding on and just pushing. So definitely significantly longer than average finish on this one, largely due just to these added ingredients and the barrel aging. This is a very, very nice, well done, flavored Belgian-style golden ale, and I am a big fan of this one. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This is Taxman Brewing Company's Bourbon Barrel Investor, a bourbon barrel-aged Belgian-style golden ale with honey and vanilla added, clocking in at 9% ABV. Taxman Brewing Company is based in Bargersville, Indiana. So starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was nice, make no mistake. It smelled quite nice, but it really lacked pungency. I had to get right up on it and give it a fair bit of agitation for any of the aroma to come out of the glass, which was surprising on a barrel-aged beer, and indeed a higher ABV beer with additives like this. It smelled really good. You could really smell the bourbon, get a little bit of the underlying sense of the Belgian strong ale backbone. The honey came through very clearly. The vanilla was very, very faint. Overall, yes, it smelled nice, but not anywhere near as pungent as I expected for a beer in this range, and certainly barrel-aged. Overall, the aroma is just average. It gets a 5 out of 10. For the taste, this beer was really, really delicious. I absolutely loved it. The bourbon barrel came through very, very clearly. The underlying malt bill of the Belgian Golden Ale also came through very, very clearly. Honey, no problem, had its own voice. Vanilla, just as with the aroma, was subtle. It was there, but it was subtle. So really, for me, I would have liked a little more balance between honey and vanilla, and also some of the underlying yeast characteristics that are so traditional in a Belgian or Belgian-style ale. I would have liked a little more presence from those factors just in terms of flavor profile. But that said, it was delicious. Overall, the taste gets a 9 out of 10. For the body, this body felt exactly right for this style of beer for the ABV range. It does get a 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel was pretty much exactly what you expect on a Belgian golden ale in this range. You know, they can kind of be all over the place. These Belgian-style golden ales and higher ABV Belgian-style ales, or from Belgium, actual Belgian versions, they do tend to have higher ABVs. They're very, very complex. They have a ton of layers. But in terms of weight and viscosity, yeah, there's some resistance to it. There's a lot of fermentables in here. It's a 9%. It may look like a paler beer, but it's 9%. There's a lot of fermentables that went in there, and that really does help to thicken it up. That was the case in this one. It was as I expected. The mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was very, very long. It was really this bourbon barrel predominantly that helped to really push it out. I mean, it was surprising how long it went, because sure, the flavors were nice and they had a decent bit of intensity, but this wasn't like barley wine intensity levels of flavor. But that bourbon barrel was still lingering well over a minute after each sip, and even that honey in the background. I was really, really impressed. Finish gets a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a great job. It formed a nice head, not too crazy, right into the right ballpark for the style, stuck around the whole time. Head and retention gets a 10 out of 10. For the appearance, I talked about this when I first started pouring the beer. Yeah, this looked more or less like a Belgian Golden Ale. It was a little bit darker. It had a little more caramel and ambery hue to it. I'm guessing they used a bit more deeply roasted malts, maybe a higher proportion in there that kind of drew that color spectrum out. It wasn't that big of a deviation from the norm, and I only docked 1 point here. The appearance does get a 9 out of 10. For the balance, overall I really like the balance of the beer. A really nice bourbon barrel that they used. They left it in a requisite amount of time to let those flavor compounds really work their magic in there. For me, for the balance of this, it was really kind of twofold, and I talked about this in the taste. It was just the ratio of honey and vanilla. I was craving a little more vanilla since they added it, and also I would have liked more of that underlying yeast character to come through. That is a defining trait of any Belgian beer, so a Belgian-style beer really needs to be yeast-centric, and I just didn't have much or any of either. Overall, though, I thought the balance in general was exceptional, well above average. Balance does get a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangibles, subjectively, I really, really liked it. I thought this was a very well done Belgian-style ale with some flavors added, barrel-aged, what's not to like. I've had a lot of beers like this. This I would put in the top, but not at that top level. I docked 1 point here. Feeling in the intangible gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this is a very, very well done Belgian-style golden ale. And then they add in the barrels, and then they add these extra ingredients, so it just ups the ante. It makes for a very rich, multi-layered beer drinking experience, and it was absolutely delicious. For me, though, as good of an example as it is, there were a few things that I did think needed tweaking, notably in the balance department, which is really kind of a make or break category for me on any beer. And certainly I would have liked a little more pungency on the aroma, especially out of a barrel-aged variant. That said, again, I did think as an example, it's well above average, and it does get a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Taxman Brewing Company's Bourbon Barrel Investor to a 90 out of 100. So only lost 10 points across 10 categories. You know, some a little more heavily weighted than others, but in the grand scheme of things, this was a really delicious beer. A very well done Belgian-style golden ale that barrel aging, it's a really nice add in there. It's such a big beer style anyway, and then they added some additional flavors. Tons of layers of flavor and complexity in this. This would keep the most ardent craft beer enthusiast and enjoyer scrutinizing over exactly what they were tasting for quite a while, and I really, really enjoyed it. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.